Mitchell's restaurant now belongs to your brother David.
She cooked every dish on that table. Every single one. The jollof rice her father always said was the best in the city. The slow braised oxtail that made her mother close her eyes when she ate it. The plantain her brother David piled on his plate without looking up from his phone. 12 years of Sunday dinners. 12 years of that kitchen. 12 years of being the reason people came to Mitchell's restaurant, and came back, and brought someone new, and whispered before they sat down, "Ask for the chef. Just ask for the chef. You will understand when the food arrives." Zara Mitchell was 34 years old, and she had saved this restaurant at 26, with her savings and her future, and 3 years of sleep she never got back. She built the menu from nothing, trained every cook in that kitchen, created supplier relationships nobody in her family knew existed because nobody in her family had ever needed to know. And on a Sunday evening, surrounded by food she made, she sat at a table that did not know it belonged to her, and waited for someone, anyone, to say her name. Her father stood up, raised his glass, and gave her restaurant to her brother. Not to Zara.
Mitchell's restaurant now belongs to your brother David.
To David, who had never worked a single shift in that kitchen, who had a business degree and a good suit and the family name in the way that had always mattered more in this house than the family work. The table applauded. Zara sat very still. She looked at her father, at her mother, at David already nodding with the ease of a man receiving something he always assumed was coming. She picked up her napkin, folded it precisely, set it beside her plate, stood up. "Congratulations, David," she said, quietly. The specific quiet of a woman who has decided that this room does not deserve her volume. She picked up her keys, walked out of that house, got in her car, and drove to the only place that had ever truly belonged to her. A small commercial kitchen on the east side she had been renting for 2 years in secret. Developing recipes her family's restaurant was too afraid to try. Building something that answered only to her. She unlocked the door, turned on the lights, tied her apron, and cooked. Not for the restaurant, not for the family, not for Sunday dinner and the good tablecloth and the performance of a family that had learned to look right from the outside. For herself. For the first time in 12 years, entirely, completely for herself. She did not know yet that 3 days later a man would stand at her window and watch her work through the glass before he knocked. She did not know he had been following her food for 2 years. She did not know that the most dangerous man in the city had been looking for her specifically, deliberately, with the focused patience of someone who understood that what she was building was worth more than anything money had ever bought him. She just cooked, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something extraordinary beginning. Before we go any further, if this story already has you hooked, hit subscribe and turn on that bell right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching Christy J's story from tonight. Drop your country in the comments. I read every single one. Now let us get back to Zara. 3 days after Sunday dinner, Zara had not returned to Mitchell's restaurant. She had not returned her father's calls, not David's, not her mother's carefully worded voicemails that managed with the skill of a woman who had spent 30 years managing family tension to make Zara's absence feel like a personal attack rather than the inevitable consequence of 34 years of taking without returning. She had been in the East Side kitchen every morning before the city was fully awake, refining, developing, building the menu she had been constructing in secret with the focused energy of a woman who had finally stopped dividing her attention between what she owed and what she deserved. The kitchen was becoming something. She could feel it the way she always felt things that mattered. In her hands first, then in her chest, then in the quiet satisfaction of work that answered only to her. On the 3rd day, she looked up from her station and saw him, a man standing at the small window beside the East Side entrance, watching her work. He was not hiding. He was simply standing there, with a specific stillness of someone who had been watching long enough to know that interrupting would be wrong. That whatever was happening inside that kitchen deserved to be witnessed before it was disturbed. Korean, early 40s, dark coat. The quiet of a man who had learned that presence was more powerful than announcement. Their eyes met through the glass. He did not look away. Neither did she. She crossed the kitchen, opened the door, looked at him with the expression of a woman who has been interrupted in the middle of something important and is giving the person responsible exactly 30 seconds to justify it. "The restaurant is not open," she said. "I know," he said. "I am not here for the restaurant." "Then what are you here for?" she asked. He reached into his coat and produced a folded paper, a review, handwritten, the kind of reverential food writing that belongs to someone who understands what they are eating at a level most people never reach. "3 days ago I went to Mitchell's restaurant," he said. "I spoke to a man who told me he was the chef." He paused. He was not the chef. Zara went very still. "How do you know?" He looked at her steadily. "Because I have been eating food made by the real chef for 2 years," he said. "And what I ate 3 days ago was not the same food." He held her gaze. "I have been looking for you," he said, "for a very long time." His name was Hyun-soo Kuan. He told her this standing in the doorway of her East Side kitchen, with the street behind him and the smell of her cooking filling the space between them like an argument he did not need to make. She did not invite him in immediately. She looked at him the way she looked at ingredients she had not worked with before. Complete attention, no commitment, the patient assessment of a woman who had learned that the most important decisions of her life had been made too quickly by people who did not take enough time. He was patient with her assessment. Did not perform. Did not fill the silence with credentials or the name-dropping that powerful men use to establish themselves in rooms that do not yet know them. He simply waited. She stepped back. He came in. He looked around the kitchen, the second-hand equipment, the recipe notebooks stacked on the corner shelf, the menu boards covered in 2 years of her most refined work, with the expression of someone seeing something they recognize as extraordinary in the way that only people who truly understand excellence can recognize it, standing in front of them without announcement. "You have been developing this for 2 years," he said, not a question. "How do you know that?" she asked. "Because the earliest dish I can trace to your hand appears in a supper club review from 26 months ago," he said. "The reviewer did not know your name, but the food was unmistakably yours." Zara looked at him. This man had been following her food for over 2 years, and he had walked into Mitchell's restaurant 3 days after she left, and known within 1 meal that she was gone. "What do you want?" she asked. He sat at the one stool beside her station, not asking permission, not performing comfort, simply occupying the space the way people occupy spaces when they have decided something. "I want to back you," he said, "completely. Your menu, your name, your kitchen, your terms." "Who are you?" she asked. Not his name, who he actually was, what he actually did, why a man she had never met had been tracking her food for 2 years and appeared at her East Side kitchen 3 days after she walked out of her family's restaurant, as if he had been waiting for exactly that moment to move. Hyun-soo looked at her with the expression of a man who had been asked this question in many rooms and had given many versions of the answer. "I am someone," he said carefully, "who has spent 20 years investing in things genuinely worth investing in." He paused. "And I have never, in 20 years, been more certain that something was worth everything I have than I am right now, standing in this kitchen." Zara held his gaze. "That is not an answer," she said. "No," he said quietly. "It is not. But it is the truth." And she understood, with the specific instinct of a woman who had spent 34 years learning to tell the difference, that both things could be true at the same time. Word traveled the way it always traveled in families that confused loyalty with ownership. fast, without accuracy, and always in the direction most useful to the people sending it. David called first, then her mother, then her father, whose call she did not answer because her father's voice in moments of conflict had always carried the specific quality of making her feel responsible for problems she did not create. The message from all three was the same message, delivered in 3 different registers. Come back. You are being selfish. The family needs you. Mitchell's is struggling without you. David is doing his best. Why are you doing this to us? Why are you doing this to us? As if 12 years of doing everything for them was simply the expected baseline, and leaving was the only action in the entire history of this relationship that counted as a choice worth questioning. Zara read the messages over her morning coffee, set her phone face down, went back to work. But the family did not stop at messages. David arrived on a Thursday afternoon. He did not knock. He walked in the way he had always walked into spaces that belonged to Zara, with the ease of a man who had never been taught that her boundaries were real rather than suggestions. He looked around the kitchen, at the menu boards, at the recipe notebooks, at everything she had been building. These recipes belong to Mitchell's, he said. Zara set down her knife, looked at him. Show me where I signed something that says that, she said quietly. David looked around the kitchen again, at the menu boards covered in 2 years of her most refined work. And she watched his expression shift, from entitlement to calculation. The specific shift of a man who had just realized that what he came to reclaim might be worth more than what he was given. Dad will take legal action, he said. Zara picked up her knife, went back to work. Tell him to bring the paperwork, she said without looking up. I have my own. She paused. And David? She looked at him once. Close the door on your way out. He left, and Zara stood in her kitchen alone and felt something she had not felt in 12 years of holding everything together for people who never once held anything for her. Not anger, not sadness. Something quieter and more permanent than both. The specific feeling of a woman who has finally stopped waiting for a family that was never going to arrive at the version of her they needed to see to treat her right. She picked up her piping bag and went back to work, because the menu was not going to finish itself, and she had never once in her professional life been late for her own work. Grace Park had owned the East Side building for 11 years. She was 58 years old, Korean American, and she had the specific energy of a woman who had seen enough of the world to know exactly what mattered and exactly what did not, and had stopped spending time on the latter a long time ago. She had given Zara the kitchen space 2 years ago when Zara walked in with a business plan and 3 months' rent in cash, and the expression of a woman who had something to prove and knew precisely how to prove it. Grace had recognized that expression immediately. She had worn it herself once, younger, in a different city, in a different kitchen that also did not yet know it was going to become something. She had given Zara the space without hesitation. And she had been bringing tea every Thursday morning since, sitting at the one stool beside Zara's station and talking about everything except what Zara was building. Because Grace understood that the building did not need commentary. It needed witness. On the Thursday after David's visit, Grace arrived with tea, sat down and looked at Zara with the expression of a woman who has seen this exact story before from a different angle. He came to take the recipes, Zara said. They always come to take the recipes, Grace said, when they realize they cannot cook without them. Zara looked at her. You knew this would happen. I knew something like this would happen, Grace said. That is why I made sure your lease was airtight. She sipped her tea. And why I introduced your food to someone who could protect it. Zara went still. What do you mean, introduced? She said. Grace set down her tea. 2 years ago, a man came to me looking for the best undiscovered chef in this city. I had been watching you for 6 months. She paused. I gave him your supper club review. Zara looked at Grace. at this woman who had been bringing tea every Thursday and saying nothing and witnessing everything, and apparently quietly, without announcement, without asking for credit, had been the architect of the most important introduction of Zara's professional life. Hyun-soo Kuan, Zara said. Grace nodded once. Who is he really? Zara asked. Grace looked at her tea for a moment, then back up. He is the most powerful restaurant investor in this city, she said carefully. And the most dangerous man I have ever trusted. She paused. The fact that he is standing in your kitchen means he has decided you are worth protecting. She looked at Zara steadily. The question is whether you are going to let him. Zara just found out that the woman who has been bringing her tea every Thursday has been quietly building the most important bridge of her life for 2 years. If you were Zara, would you have walked out of that Sunday dinner? Or would you have stayed and fought from the inside? And gentlemen, if you were Hyun-soo, and you found the most extraordinary talent you had ever encountered hidden in a small East Side kitchen, what would you do next? Tell me in the comments right now. Tell me where in the world you are watching Christy J's story from tonight. Subscribe and hit that bell, because what the family does next, nobody saw coming. Zara's father filed a legal claim on a Monday morning. Intellectual property, the recipes, the techniques, the flavor profiles that Mitchell's restaurant had built its reputation on. All of it belonging, according to the claim, to the restaurant, and not to the chef who created every single piece of it, across 12 years of work. That nobody in that family had ever once called by its right name. The claim was technically arguable. It was also specifically designed to do one thing: stop Zara before she could open and force her back into a position of dependency on the family that had always confused her talent with their asset. She sat with the papers for exactly 5 minutes. The specific 5 minutes of a woman who allows herself to feel the full weight of something before she decides what to do with it. Then she called her lawyer, a woman she had kept on retainer for 3 years because she always knew this day was a possibility, even when she hoped it wasn't. Hyun-soo found out the same morning. He arrived at the East Side kitchen that afternoon and sat across from her at the counter and looked at the papers, and then looked at her with the expression of a man who was about to offer something he already knew was going to be refused. Let me handle it, he said. No, she said. Zara, no. Not sharp, not angry, final in the way she said everything that was final. The moment your world solves my problems become your world's problems. And I will not have what I am building touched by that. Not one brick of it. He looked at her for a long time. You are the most principled person I have met in 20 years, he said. No, she said. I am the most specific. There is a difference. But that evening, alone in the kitchen reviewing documents, she felt it. The first real crack in the composure she had been carrying since Sunday dinner. Not fear. Something older. The specific exhaustion of a woman who has been fighting her entire life and is beginning to understand that the fight does not end when you leave. It just changes shape. Her phone rang. Not her father. Not David. Her mother, whose voice on the other end was not the voice of the legal threat or the Sunday dinner performance or the carefully worded voicemails. It was the voice of a woman who was genuinely frightened not of losing the restaurant, of losing her daughter. And Zara, sitting alone in her East Side kitchen, surrounded by 12 years of undocumented evidence of everything she built, had to decide what to do with a mother who loved her imperfectly and was only now beginning to understand what that cost. Zara went to see her mother alone. Not because of the legal threat, not because Grace suggested it, not because Hyun-soo asked. Because she had realized, sitting in her kitchen at 6 a.m. with the legal documents beside her morning coffee, that the one conversation she had never had was the one she needed to have before she could build anything new on ground still haunted by everything unsaid. Sandra Mitchell, 61 years old, a woman who had spent her life holding a family together by making herself smaller than she needed to be, opened the door and looked at her daughter with the expression of a woman who had been rehearsing this moment for 5 days and had forgotten everything she planned to say the moment the door opened. Zara did not go inside. She stood in the doorway and said what she came to say. About 12 years of Sunday dinners where the food was hers and the credit belonged to the family name. About the morning at 26 years old when she signed away her savings to save a restaurant that was handed to her brother. 34 years later, at a Sunday dinner, like a side dish, nobody thought to explain. About what it costs a woman to be extraordinary in a family that needs her to be ordinary to feel comfortable. She did not ask for an apology. She had stopped needing apologies from people who did not fully understand what they had done. When she finished, Sandra was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "I knew it was wrong." Simply, without defense. Without the machinery of justification that families use to make cruelty feel like tradition. "I knew every time," Sandra said. "And I told myself it was just how things were done. And I told myself you were strong enough to carry it." She stopped. "I told myself a lot of things that were easier than telling your father the truth." Zara looked at her mother, at this woman who loved her imperfectly and knew it, and had not known how to do it differently. "I am not coming back to Mitchell's," Zara said. "I know," her mother said. "But I am not leaving you," Zara said. Her mother reached out and took her hand, the hand that had taught Zara to cook in a kitchen 30 years ago, when everything was simple, and the food was just food, and nobody was keeping score. Zara held it for a moment. Then she let go, turned around, walked to her car. She drove back to the East Side kitchen, unlocked the door, turned on the lights, tied her apron, and stood at her station for a long moment before she picked up her knife. Because something had shifted in the corridor outside her mother's door. Not forgiveness that would take longer and would have to be chosen again and again over time. Something more immediate. The specific lightness of a woman who has said the true thing to the right person and is no longer carrying it alone. She picked up her knife, and the kitchen filled with the smell of something that had finally been given permission to grow. The legal case moved faster than the family anticipated. Zara's documentation was 12 years of evidence they had not known she was keeping. Recipe development notebooks with dates, financial records showing her personal investment in the restaurant's turnaround, supplier contracts in her name, emails, photographs, the complete paper trail of a woman who had always understood at some level that the day would come when she would need to prove what she had built. The family's claim began to collapse within 3 weeks. David came to the East Side kitchen on a Tuesday morning, alone, not with lawyers, not with their father's authority behind him. Just David, in clothes that did not fit the occasion the way his suits always fit occasions, looking like a man who had spent a week having certainties removed one by one, and was still adjusting to the new weight of himself. He sat at the stool beside her station. She kept working. "I did not know he was going to do it like that," he said. "The Sunday dinner announcement. I did not know until he stood up." She kept working. "I am not asking you to forgive me," he said. "I am asking you to believe that." She set down her knife, looked at him. "I believe you, David," she said, "and it does not change anything. Because the problem was never the announcement. The problem was 34 years of a family that looked at what I built and saw a resource instead of a person." She looked at him steadily. "You benefited from that, whether you knew what you were doing or not." David was quiet for a long time. "What do you need from me?" he asked. The question landed differently than she expected. Not because it was enough, because it was the first time in 34 years that someone in her family had asked what she needed rather than telling her what they needed from her. "Drop the legal claim," she said. Acknowledge publicly that the menu at Mitchell's is mine, and give me the Okafor supplier contact that Dad has been keeping from me for 3 years because he knew I would leave if I had it. David looked at her. How do you know about the Okafor contact? Zara almost smiled. Because I built that restaurant, David, she said. I know everything about it, including the things I was not supposed to know. She picked up her knife and went back to work. And David sat at the stool beside her station in a kitchen that had always been hers, and was only now beginning to look like it, and understood for the first time the full dimension of what his family had been standing on, and what it had cost the woman who built it. The legal claim was dropped on a Wednesday. David's public statement was brief, factual, and carried the specific discomfort of a man doing the right thing without enjoying it. The Okafor supplier contact arrived by email the following morning. Zara read it, filed it, went back to work. But something else happened that nobody in the family anticipated. The statement, David's acknowledgement that the menu at Mitchell's belonged to Zara, traveled faster than the legal claim ever had. The city's food community picked it up. Food writers who had been eating at Mitchell's for years and had always suspected that the genius behind the menu was not the name above the door began to ask questions, to write things, to talk. And the East Side kitchen, which had been feeding a quiet and growing word of mouth for 2 years, suddenly had a name attached to it that the city recognized. Hyun-soo had been quiet through all of it, present, available, never once pushing her toward his resources when she had refused them, never once making her feel the weight of what he was not doing because she had asked him not to. On the morning of the soft opening, he arrived at the kitchen before first light. Zara was already at her station in her chef whites, fitted, precise, her grandmother's gold earrings the only personal thing visible above the collar. Grace was at the counter, tea in hand, the quiet, permanent presence of a woman who had planted something 2 years ago and had been watching it grow, one Thursday morning at a time. Hyun-soo set something on the counter beside Grace's tea, a single document. The deed to the East Side building. Grace sold it to me last week, he said. I am transferring it to you this morning. Zara looked at the document, at Grace. Grace looked at her tea with the expression of a woman who had been planning this since the day Zara walked in with 3 months' rent in cash and a business plan, and the specific expression of someone who had something to prove. You cannot build an empire on ground that does not belong to you, Grace said simply. Zara looked at Hyun-soo, at this man who had watched her through a window before he knocked and had never once tried to redirect what she was building toward what was convenient for him. Why? She asked, not about the building, about all of it. Why he followed her food for 2 years. Why he watched through the window before he knocked. Why he waded through the legal battle without once pushing her toward what he could have solved in a single phone call. Hyun-soo looked at her for a long moment. Because everything you have built, he said, you built on ground that did not belong to you. And I wanted to change that before you opened, not after, before. He paused. Because you deserve to start on ground that is entirely yours. Zara looked at the deed, at the building that had been the most honest place she had ever stood, and felt something she had been keeping carefully locked begin slowly, with the specific caution of a woman who has learned that good things can be taken to open. 6 months later. Sunday morning. The East Side kitchen had a name above the door now, Zara's, in clean, simple letters that she had painted herself on a Sunday morning, while Grace watched from the counter and Hyun-soo brought coffee neither of them asked for. The city had found her, not through advertising, not through a campaign or a launch or the machinery of a publicist. Through food, through the specific revolution of a menu that had been developing in a small kitchen for 2 years and was now fully itself in a space that belonged entirely to the woman who built it. A publication had featured her last month, not as a family restaurant's chef, not as someone's daughter, not as the woman behind Mitchell's turnaround, as Zara Mitchell, chef. The piece ran with a photograph of her hands at her station and the name above the door visible in the background. She read it once, filed it, went back to work. Mitchell's restaurant was still open, quieter now, the menu less extraordinary without the hand that built it. Her father had not called in 3 months. David called sometimes. She answered sometimes. That was where they were, and it was more honest than anything that came before it. Her mother came on Wednesday mornings, sat at the counter with Grace, drank tea, did not ask about the business or Hyun-soo, just came. And Zara cooked something small for her every Wednesday. Not from obligation, from the specific choice of a woman who had decided that love and accountability could exist in the same relationship if both people were willing to be honest about what went wrong. Grace was at the counter every morning, permanent, warm. The woman who had planted the seed of everything that grew and had never once asked for credit. Hyun-soo came on Sunday mornings, not with grand gestures, with specific things. The supplier contact she mentioned once. The reservation system her kitchen needed. The quiet, steady presence of a man who showed up and stayed and never once made her feel the weight of his showing up. One Sunday morning 6 months after the soft opening, on a morning that smelled like brown butter and the East Side street coming alive outside the windows, he set something on the counter beside her morning coffee. Small, specific. A ring. Not extravagant, not a performance. Something chosen with the attention of a man who had been paying attention since the first morning he stood at her window and watched her work through the glass. Zara looked at it, looked at him, looked at Grace, who was very carefully looking at her tea. "Grace," Zara said. "I am not here," Grace said. Zara looked at the ring, at this man who had found her in a small East Side kitchen at midnight, and knocked and waited and had never once asked her to be anything other than exactly what she was. She picked it up, put it on her own finger, looked at it for a moment in the morning light coming through the East Side windows. Then she picked up her knife and went back to work. Because the first service started at noon, and she had never once in her professional life been late. Hyun-soo sat at the counter with his coffee, watching her the way he had watched her through the window the very first morning, with genuine attention, like someone watching a language being spoken that they are grateful every single day they stayed long enough to learn. The ring caught the light as her hands moved. The name was above the door. The building belonged to her. And the empire, the real one, the one nobody gave her, the one she built from a second-hand kitchen and 2 years of secret recipes, and the absolute refusal to let a family that confused her talent with their asset determine what she was worth, was just beginning. Grace made a sound from her corner of the counter. Half laugh, half something older and warmer than laughter. Zara Mitchell, 34 years old, Chef White's, a ring she put on her own finger, and a name above a door that belongs entirely to her. If you were Zara, would you have walked out of that Sunday dinner? Or would you have stayed and fought from the inside? And gentlemen, if a woman like Zara was building something extraordinary in a small kitchen, and you found her through the window, what would you do? Tell me in the comments. Tell me where in the world you are watching Christy J's story from tonight. Subscribe and hit that bell. We will see you in the next story.